Okay, let's start with Bottles and then ease into OBS. Bottles is an application that allows you to run Windows software. It relies on Wine, obviously, that's the name, and it makes it easy to create environments with specific window prefixes, settings, and dependencies. It lets you select various components to run those applications and comes with an integrated package window manager. Many people bring the project forward. Two of them, which you will often see in this story, are Harry Rana, aka the Evil Skeleton, and Mirko. Now, Bottle does not have a set release schedule, and on top of that, its dependencies change really fast, sometimes they are even custom made, and a reliable environment is necessary to triage any issue that might arise. Due to all of these reasons, packaging Bottles has been a somewhat complex and time-consuming task, and due to not enough developer time spent around it, the Fedora RPM package of Bottles quickly fell out of date. This led users to continue reporting already addressed bugs to Bottle developers, and on top of that, the packaging, according to Rana, was done incorrectly, introducing some bugs of its own. According to them, these bugs account for the majority of reports to Bottle developers. This causes many issues for Bottle developers. Not only do they have to deal with an increased triaging workload, but their brand is also damaged by these issues. As a direct example, the Linux cast wanted to do a video about the application, but due to an RPM packaging issue, it was unable to even start the application. Oh, and this is not relevant to the story, but Rana points out that in the example I provided above, we were really lucky for being aware of it, only because we were pinged. And that's me. I pinged them. I am in this story too. Oh, and let me quickly mention that if you prefer reading over listening, this entire video is also available as an article right now on thelibre.news, link in the video description. But if you prefer the video, keep watching. Anyhow, as a result of all of these issues with packaging, the Bottles team asked Fedora to remove the RPM package so that Bottles would only be shipped via Flatpak. This would also improve security, as Wine can introduce some vulnerabilities that are addressed by Flatpak's sandboxing. Though the Fedora people maintaining this project initially agreed to retire the package, they had a change of mind and decided to make sure that it was not outdated for the next major release, and then to start looking for other maintainers for the package. The Fedora team here is trying to say, okay, look, we know how to deal with irregular release schedules and changing dependencies. We saw interest in this package, so we'd like to keep working on it. According to Fabio from the Fedora side, the reason that the Bottles packages was out of date in the first place is that one of Bottle dependencies, or JSON, could cause some sig faults, and they were trying to push a fix upstream to the project. To quote him, again, Bottles developers might not care, but this is the reason why Linux distributions exist, because we need to care about these nitty-gritty low-level things to make things work, even if upstream developers don't or cannot. However, Bottle developers quickly asked Bottles not to be shipped as a Fedora package. Understandably, they had lost trust that Fedora could keep up with the quickly changing requirements of the project and preferred the stability that Flatpaks were giving them. Another point that they raised is that the Fedora maintainer for the project was sort of asking the developers to work with them to some extent to make sure that the packaging was done properly. This is not something that Bottle developers had the time or interest to do. However, it seems like these requirements did not stop Fedora from still intending to ship the Bottles package. As a result, Mirko decided to retire the AUR package as well and make sure to disable support links for unofficially distributed Bottle versions, along with a warning and request to use the official one. On top of that, he says that in the event of the removal of these controls or falsification of the product's identity, we will consider implementing restrictions on Bottle repositories for unofficial packages. Personally, I felt like the Fedora person here missed the mark and on his comment by replying with, and I quote, "The above sounds to me like it's one step short of moving to a restrictive non-FOSS license, but seeing that most of you are involved in open source in some way or another, I'm sure you are aware that doing so would close the doors for your audience." This was the end of the story for them. Bottle developers did end up feeling frustrated and disappointed in their experience with the Fedora packaging. However, there are a couple of other examples to bring up concerning this, and they do require some additional context. So you're probably aware of Flatpaks and their sandboxing benefits. I believe most people associate them with FlatHub, where most Flatpaks are distributed. To get an application on FlatHub, you have to respect many guidelines with the goal of ensuring that applications hosted on FlatHubs are safe to use and integrate well in the desktop experience. On top of that, some FlatHub applications are verified, which means that the official developers or authorized third parties claimed ownership of that specific Flatpak. This tells you that you're downloading an application as the developers meant it to be. Though Fedora offers both FlatHub and RPM packages, they also maintain their own Flatpak remote, called, unsurprisingly, Fedora Flatpaks. Though it was meant to be used on Fedora, it can also be used on any other distribution. Now, would it shock you to discover that the announcement that I've just shown you comes directly from Hari Rana, the Bottle developer? The open source world is a small place, I guess. So Fedora Flatpaks has a few differences from FlatHub. Firstly, they do not allow for any proprietary application to be shipped there. All Flatpaks are fully open sourced. Secondly, FlatHub does not impose any kind of limitation on which source the Flatpak reuses to be shipped. This means that sometimes it's a deb package, sometimes an app image as an app package, or an archive or from source, whereas Fedora Flatpaks all consistently reuse RPM packages. According to Matt, the Fedora project leader, FlatHub rules are quite lax, and there's not much of a review without checking that it was built with good practices. Fedora Flatpaks are instead built with a secure pipeline so that a user can have more trust that a package is going to be what it says it is. And by the way, it says so in a 40-minute interview with Brody Robertson, which I would highly suggest that you go check out. As a result of all of this, according to Neil Gompa, a few distros are even considering to use Fedora Flatpaks over FlatHub. However, this new system also has its own issues. Namely, sometimes applications are shipped with more bugs compared to upstream. Take Fractal as an example. Recently, a missed dependency issue went completely unnoticed, and as a result, the Fedora Flatpak version lost the ability to see images. As a developer points out, the upstream Flatpak on FlatHub was properly tested by the developers and included all components needed for the correct functionality. During the period when this was broken, a number of people came to the Fractal Matrix channel looking for help, and the responses given to them was almost universally: the Fedora Flatpak is broken, switch to FlatHub and report a bug to Fedora. This is not an isolated example. Fedora codec policies also mean that Kdenlive and media players will not be able to edit or play media without a clear indication on why this is happening in the first place. A similar situation was happening with OBS, the program that I'm using right now to record this video. The Fedora Flatpak version of OBS is shipped with multiple issues: missing hardware acceleration, crashes on X11, VLC plugin not working out of the box, and they also included third-party plugins out of the box. On top of that, due to either technological or legal reasons, the package also lacked a Twitch or YouTube panels. And the above issues, and many others, such as this one, were regularly reported to OBS directly, which often had to close them and point out that the Fedora Flatpak version of their program was unofficial. Over time, the usage of Fedora Flatpaks raised some concerns. As an example, one developer, Jordan Petridis, decided to propose GNOME software to always use the verified FlatHub applications over any non-verified one. In practice, this would mean that if an application is shipped on FlatHub by the developers themselves, then software would always install that one instead of using other remotes such as Fedora Flatpaks. This change was eventually accepted and merged. Another discussion that's still ongoing is the ability to set a default remote to download applications from. Right now you can only select it on a per application basis, and there's no UI way to say, hey, I always want to download from FlatHub instead of Fedora Flatpaks. Oh, and by the way, KDE Discover does have this functionality out of the box. This does not matter at all, but I just had to point it out. I'm a KDE developer, if you didn't know. Oh, and since I drifted off topic anyway, let me mention that this video is not sponsored by anyone, and yet it took time and money and equipment and contractors to make it. You can help support the channel via donation on Patreon, Liberapay, Ko-Fi, and PayPal. But anyway, back to the topic. The discussion did not just happen over GNOME, but an issue was opened in Fedora 2 asking to deprioritize or remove Fedora Flatpaks and prioritize Flatab in GNOME software due to quality issues when using Fedora's Flatpaks app. One of the people who disagreed with this proposal was Yakov Selkovs. I cannot pronounce this. Selkovitz, I'm so sorry, also the maintainer of the OBS Fedora Flatpak. According to him, many of these complaints would apply equally to the RPMs. Many of these complaints would also apply equally to RPMs. I see this as no different than the Bottles fiasco from earlier. If software is free and open source, then by definition we must have the right to redistribute it as we please, and upstream cannot restrict that and remain free and open source. As such, I don't think we should need to entertain any such request by upstream not to distribute their software in whichever form it may be. Personally, I take very dim view on such requests. Which, by the way, is why I started this story by talking about Bottles. I believe you should now start to see a pattern emerging. Another interesting quote from his message is, "Based on what I've seen in discussion along these lines, what we have now is a new era in which upstreams now believe that, thanks to Flatab, etc., they don't need distributions anymore for their software to reach users, no longer see the value in distributions, and simply wish to cut off the middleman entirely. However, that does not give them the right or power to do so." The discussion continued for pages and pages. Just a couple of weeks ago, developer Michael Catanzaro said that after a long discussion during a workstation working group meeting, there was some level of agreement that Fedora Flatpaks are generally the worst software source for users to install, and that good Flatab should be preferred over Fedora Flatpaks. During all of this, 4 weeks ago, Joel Beth from the OBS project created an issue to ask the Fedora OBS Flatpak to be either removed or to make it clear that it is a third-party package. Given the issues presented above, this can only be seen as a reasonable request. Discussion about this was happening on the other thread I mentioned, but it was more general. Around the same time, Georgios Stavrakas also raised the issue, saying that overriding the only official version of OBS with a Fedora-specific Flatpak was unacceptable. However, in all of this, all the issues of the OBS Fedora Flatpak were being reported to OBS, not Fedora, which meant that Yakov was completely unaware of the issues. Thus, he just asked for those issues to be raised to Fedora, a request that Stavrakas deemed absurd. Eventually, when told that Fedora does have the right to redistribute OBS, Stavrakas asked for a rebrand to make sure it was clear that the project was unofficial. Overall, this came out to be yet another bad experience with Fedora packaging. As a final bit of context, during the conversation on whether to deprioritize Fedora Flatpaks in favor of Flatab, it was pointed out that OBS was currently relying on an EOL end-of-life version of Qt, the graphical toolkit to display the interface, due to regressions with more modern Qt versions. My understanding is that Fedora Flatpaks maintainers decided that this was unacceptable and decided to ship OBS with a more recent Qt version. On one hand, I can understand the choice to avoid end-of-life runtimes. On the other hand, you're intentionally shipping something that was deemed too broken to work by OBS developers. As a result, Michael Catanzaro pointed out that allowing this to happen was terrible maintainership on OBS side and showed that the Fedora Flatpaks did have an added value component to Flatab, since it used a more up-to-date Qt version. The words terrible maintainership plus Bethke's request to remove the OBS Flatpak getting completely ignored prompted OBS to take stronger measures. They thus threatened Fedora with legal action if they kept using their branding for the unofficial Flatpak, asking for a response within 7 business days. It's worth noting that the very first like on this comment was by Harry Rana, who had previously been disappointed by Fedora's handling of upstream remove us requests. Immediately, Neil Gompa, the maintainer of the RPM package of OBS, reached out to the project to try to do damage control. He created an issue to remove the OBS Studio Flatpak from the registry, immediately, and this raised some discussion on how exactly to do that. If you just removed it, it will still stay on the user's computers, and the only result is that their version will slowly go unmaintained until they delete and reinstall the application. However, this discussion was finally taking place at all. The option to rebrand from the Flatpak to avoid using any of the OBS branding was also briefly considered, but ultimately none of this ended up being necessary, thankfully. As another way to immediately address the situation, Yakov marked the OBS Flatpak as end of life within hours of OBS request. Nonetheless, a great amount of discussion was raised in the thread. Harry Rana pointed out that previous responses on these issues were shallow and completely inconsiderate of our point of view, and specifically mentioned Yakov's unwillingness to cooperate until the trademark enforcement occurred. Bethke agreed with Harry, mentioning a lack of willingness to work with upstream. Yakov decided to apologize for the lack of responses in the initial thread and offered to have a direct talk with Bethke. This seemed to have worked, as he then retracted his request to remove the Flatpak immediately and said that he felt like now he could work with Fedora to tackle the issues presented in the Fedora OBS Flatpak. He said, and I quote, "The discussion was positive and they are actively working to resolve those issues as well, which should hopefully only affect a small number of users." Thus, I can only praise the good damage control by the Fedora project here, especially I think by Neil, but also Yakov and others. Of course, it would have been better to avoid this conflict altogether, but whatever. This does not solve the broader issue by any means, though. The Fedora Flatpaks still exist, discussion about them is still active, and it's not yet clear when users should be directed towards them and when instead they should be using FlatUp. Matt, the Fedora project leader, has stressed that Fedora cares a lot about good collaboration with upstream projects, and I believe that these were maybe just a few exceptions where the discussion got too heated. However, I'm still not fully comfortable with a Fedora maintainer saying that upstream does not have the right to ask Fedora not to repackage their application. I don't really like that. That said, this was the entire story as far as I know it. Thank you for following and see you tomorrow. Pretty long videos. Let's stop.